right. Yeah, I will. I'll look it over when we're done. Can you hit the light for me? We'll give it a few more seconds for people to show up. Hopefully they will. I had a lot of interest in this one because of writer's block. So we'll see how it plays out. Oh. Will do. I simplified my setup with yeah. I'm gonna throw you.
No, you're not.
I could easily. You don't weigh that much. You're like maybe 80 pounds.
No, it's more than that.
No.
No. Try throwing her.
I don't want to. She's good.
Yeah.
She's good. She's well behaved. All right. So we're talking about dealing with writer's block and learning how to motivate yourself in as a writer. And so this is our agenda. I'm going to talk about what writer's block is, how to identify writer's block, tips for beating writer's block, and then motivating yourself to write, and then we'll have a writer's prompt. So here we go. I'm going to skip my usual introduction, and I'm going to simplify it. For those of you online who are tuning in, my name is Garrett K. Jones. I'm an author, podcast host. I have a background in creative writing, and I have several books out, including a new one that just came out 3 weeks ago called Midnight Playground, which is an anthology of short stories. And I now have physical copies. So, hooray! All right, boom. All right, defining writer's block. Writer's block is the condition of being unable to think of what to write. I'll move my podium over here so I can see it a little bit better. It is also the inability to proceed with writing. All right? So either you are unable to think of what you want to write and put down on paper, or you are unable to actually proceed with the process of writing. All right? That's kind of a big deal. This is where a lot of writers get stuck. They don't know what they're doing, or they don't know how they got to this point. A little over 10 years ago, I hit a point like this myself, where I got stuck. I was in the process of writing my first book. I hit this jumble, and I just didn't know what else to do. And thankfully, I connected with someone who started telling me about how to do independent publishing without having to pay a whole lot of money. And that's what kind of really jump-started me back into creativity. And so that was what helped me after a couple of years of having a dry spell. And then just a couple of years ago, I had another dry spell with regards to my fantasy series. And I started working on other projects, and that has since helped. And we'll talk more about that. But this is something that does creep up on people from time to time. So let's define writer's block a little bit more. It's caused by psychological factors, it's caused by external factors, and it's caused by other causes. All right? So, Virginia, what are some psychological factors that you think might play into how writer's block is caused?
Stress and anxiety, just thinking what other people would think about it and thinking the worst of everything.
You would be absolutely correct. So, for example, perfectionism, that fear of making mistakes or subpar work. If you think your writing isn't great, if you feel like it has to be absolutely perfect before you can take it to publication, that's going to stick in your mind, and it's going to prevent you from being able to do anything productive. Procrastination is another one. This is where you put off writing because of anxiety or no motivation to write at all. I cannot tell you the number of times where I have sat down at my computer to write something, and the first thing that pops into my mind is, oh, what's happening on Instagram? Or what's new in my YouTube feed? Or, hey, I just got a text message from somebody. I should respond to this. And I find myself spending more time on that screen than I do on the screen that I should be writing on. Okay? Another psychological factor, self-doubt, which you were mentioning, Virginia. This is where you're questioning your own abilities. A lot of people have a tendency to think about what they're doing with their writing, and they call it into question. A lot of people get in their own heads and they look at, maybe they wrote one bad sentence and they freak out about that. Or maybe their character development isn't very strong because they really aren't sure how to go about doing it. It's all simply just a matter of belief in one's self and your abilities. The next one is stress or anxiety. Feeling overwhelmed can really get you. If your schedule has you feeling incredibly overwhelmed, like you get home from school or you get home from work, and the last thing you want to do is sit in front of a computer, that's going to mess with you. When I was living up in Clovis in between 2010 and 2012, I was working for a call center where I was in front of a computer 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, sometimes having to work overtime when it was required. And by the time I got home, the last thing I wanted to do was sit in front of another computer. I hated it. And so what I ended up doing is I spent my time, ironically, sitting in front of my Xbox, which is also another computer. But what I was doing there was actually just doing something mindless and in this kind of vegetative state where I could just decompress from everything before I went to bed, because I was working a late shift. I would be going into work at like 2 o'clock, 2:30, getting off work 8 hours or 9 hours later, and then going home and just decompressing before I'd be able to get some sleep. Now, I was very productive in the mornings, where I would get up, I would clean my apartment, I would go to the gym maybe, then I'd go to work, but I was stressed out and feeling very anxious about getting back into writing. Okay, external factors. This could come from a lack of ideas. Lack of ideas happens frequently. I mean, you can see it with Disney right now. They have a lack of fresh ideas, which is why they keep remaking live action films based off of their animated classics. I mean, case in point, Moana, the original film, is only 8 years old, and they're already making a live action remake. And the only actor that they're pulling from it is Dwayne Johnson. So Disney is fresh out of ideas. Distractions. So many things can become a distraction. Cooking can be a distraction. How your work environment can be a distraction. If it's really cluttered, if it's really messy, that can be distracting. If you have a phone and you're on social media, or you're playing video games, or you're watching TV, whatever it is that you're doing, that can become a distraction. If you have time constraints, this is a big one. One of my biggest time constraints in the past has been trying to balance my work-home life balance, and at the end of the day, something is going to have to give. Either I'm going to have to focus on my home life, I'm going to have to focus on my work life, and somewhere in between, I'm just going to have to sleep. And writing doesn't get done. So these are external circumstances that can affect your ability to get any writing done. Then there's others. Burnout is a really big one. Burnout is where you feel exhausted or depleted from writing for extended periods. You hit this point where you've been doing so much writing, you don't want to touch it for a while. Okay? This happens. I've dealt with it. Okay? Maybe it's a lack of research, not having enough information about a topic when you are writing. That can really hold somebody up. If you're writing something that is, say, like it's science fiction and it's super technical, and you don't have enough information at your hands, that lack of research is going to cause you to put off writing, because then you're going to have to spend time doing that research. All right? Personal problems. Personal problems are a big deal these can creep into your life. Maybe it's a relationship with family members. Maybe it's a relationship with a significant other. Maybe it's a relationship with friends. Maybe it's finances. Maybe it's whatever that personal problem is, that will play a factor in whether or not you're able to be productive as a writer. Okay? Now, a lot of people have turned to writing to get away from their problems. And that's great because they're able to pour into what they're working on. But a lot of times those personal problems will filter in and create a disruption and interrupt that writing process. Here, I'm getting some posts on. Anyway, moving on. All right, so let's identify writer's block a little bit more. This is little to no meaningful engagement whatsoever. This is sitting down at your notebook with a pen in hand and maybe writing half a sentence, or maybe just a couple of words, and just stopping there. This could be sitting at a computer, and you bring up the Word document that you were working on, and you can't put anything on that page. Okay? Maybe it's you're just staring at that blank page for hours on end. I've done that. It sucks. It also involves no motivation. Okay? As much as you want to write, you just do not feel it. You're not in that mode, you're not vibing it, and you'd rather do anything else but write. In fact, there's a frequent joke amongst writers on Instagram that I've seen where the person is given an opportunity to sit down and write, or sit down and procrastinate and do anything else but write. And the person is like sweating over these two. It's the meme of the guy, trying to decide if he wants to push the two buttons and which one to push. And it's, do I write? Do I procrastinate? And he's just freaking out about that. And I've seen that so many times because it really affects authors in a big way. Now, this is a quote from an author that I respect. I have had the opportunity to read his work. He is a very well-versed writer. His name is Jonathan Mayberry. He has got his own sci-fi and horror series. He has worked on anthologies and very popular franchises. He's worked for Marvel, writing for Wolverine and Black Panther in the past. In fact, one of his graphic novel series that he did for IDW Publishing was turned into a series on Netflix. But this is a quote that I found on the internet. It's something that he shared with me when I had the opportunity to interview him a couple of years ago. He says, "I park my butt in a chair and write. I learned that writer's block is a myth created by people who don't have or understand a writing process." Yeah.
What is IDW?
IDW is a comics publisher.
Oh.
Yeah. They currently do a lot of the publishing for several Hasbro properties, including G.I. Joe, Transformers, He-Man, Masters of the Universe, stuff like that. Now, while he is right, there are a lot of people out there who don't have or understand a writing process. But a writing process can be developed. And even if you have a writing process, sometimes you do hit walls. I'm not going to say that it's 100% a myth. This is where Mr. Mayberry and I disagree. And he might have something to say about that. I don't know. But because I've encountered it in my own life, I had to rethink how my writing process worked. Okay, before, I hand wrote everything in all my notebooks until I finished the story, and then I went back and started transcribing. That stopped working for me after a while because it was so long and so tedious. So then what I started is I had to rethink what my process looked like, because I couldn't just sit down at a computer and just start typing away. In small cases where I'm doing like a short story or I'm doing like something of a finite number of words, that I can do. If I'm doing a long stretch of writing where I'm writing out like 4,500 words or so, that's going to take a little bit longer. So what I did is I redeveloped what I was doing, and I started handwriting my stories chapter by chapter, and then I would go in and transcribe it, and that became my second draft. So I had to redevelop what my writing process was. Okay? And you have to figure out what's going to work for you in the long run. So here are some tips for overcoming writer's block. First and foremost, you need to change your space. Okay? This is physically changing your space. Sometimes changing your physical location can help you focus. If you've gotten used to writing in your bedroom, at your desk, and it is not working for you, find a new location. Come to the library. Find a quiet spot to sit up in the upper balcony and write. Or sit at one of the cubicles and write. Or if you feel more comfortable, go to a coffee shop. Find a place where you can just sit down and relax and just be you and get into the mode and just start writing. Okay? Changing your physical space. One of the things that you might do, if you don't want to change locations, but you feel really distracted by stuff in that writing space, clean it up. If there's a lot of clutter, clean it up. If there's trash, get rid of it, throw it out. If there's other things that can be a distraction for you, like maybe it's a computer or you've got a phone, whatever it is, get rid of those distractions. Don't even take the phone in there with you to your computer. Now, what I run into is one of my computers and my iPad are all linked up with my phone. So I could be sitting at my computer doing something and all of a sudden a message pops up. Or I will get a phone call and that phone call will pop up on my screen and I'll be able to take that on my computer and be like, crud, there goes that distraction. So figure out what kind of a physical space you need for writing. Yeah, James?
Can't you put it on airplane mode?
You can do that, but just because your phone's on airplane mode, it doesn't mean that your iPad or your computer are.
It does on airplane mode.
Also can be done, but say for example you're on airplane mode and you need to research something. You don't have Wi-Fi.
Get another device.
That can become a distraction. Do you see the loophole that it creates? Yeah. All right, tip number 2. Read your last good page. All right? If it's been a while since you've worked on a project, read your last good page, because what this does is it helps immerse you into your story's world, which is less abrupt than just sitting down to write. I cannot tell you the number of times I've sat down to write and nothing comes out. I read like the last couple of paragraphs or sentences in the chapter that I'm working on, and I'm like, I don't enjoy this. I'm not enjoying this. So to kind of force myself to get back into writing on something, I will look at the last good thing that I wrote for that story, and I will get into that. I will start reading through to make sure that I understand and get my head into that space where I need to be to enjoy and appreciate what I've already got on the page. All right. Next. Tip number 3, free writing. All right. This may take the pressure off and help you unwind-relax. I like that word, unwind-relax. As you get back into the habit of writing after a dry spell. This could be anything from journaling to looking up a random prompt on the internet and just going off of that. It could be coming to a writer's workshop and being given a prompt at the end of the workshop. Whatever it is that helps you, free writing can jumpstart those creative juices. Because what's happening is when you're forcing yourself to be creative, your brain starts practicing it more. Okay? When you are out of a habit, when you've broken a habit like writing is a muscle, just like anything else, you are going to be very rusty at it. To get yourself back on that horse, what you need to do is you need to practice. And you don't get to Carnegie Hall without practice. Okay? Big deal. So free writing is a great way to get yourself practicing those skills all over again. Tip number 4, take a break. Okay? Creative burnout is real. Creative burnout is going to happen. Sometimes all it takes for inspiration to return is to take a step back and to just let it go. Okay? there have been times where I've had to take breaks. When I was in school, working on stuff for my capstone at CSU Monterey Bay, my capstone was on comic literature. I had to write, there was a huge essay dissertation portion of it, but I had to do a creative portion as well because I was a creative writer. And my creative portion, a lot of other students were doing short stories or poetry. I didn't want to do anything like that. I've always kind of marched to the beat of my own drum. And so what I ended up doing is I did a series of comic strip style stories where I had to not only draw the characters, I had to draw out the panels because we didn't have like the software that we have now to just create comic strips digitally. And maybe it was available, I just didn't know where to find the resources. But I had to do the layout for every single comic strip. I had to measure out my panels. I had to pencil everything first. And then I had to go back in, ink and color as I needed to. And it got really time consuming. And before I could even put pen to paper and draw anything, which I'm not that great of an artist, I had to go in and I had to write out a script for every single strip that I was writing. Okay? And it was time consuming because I had something like 27 comic strips. Most of them had 3 panels, but some of them had 5, 6, 7, 8. I think the longest one I did was 10 panels. Okay? That's 10 scenes that I have to write. And I had to, and it's like scripting it out just like you would for a film. You have to describe what's in the scene. You have to describe how the characters are positioned. You have to describe how you're going to draw the character. The easiest one that I had to do was a single page, it was a splash page of my main character thinking to himself and talking to himself while in a bookstore. And so nothing really is going on, but I had to go through and script that whole thing. But what I would do to keep myself from burning out, because I was doing a lot of this during my spring break time. I didn't go home for spring break. I didn't go on vacation for spring break. I stayed on campus, living in my apartment, going to work at a McDonald's in Monterey, and then coming home and working on all of this. I would take breaks. I would go catch a movie. Or I would play video games to help me unwind. Or I would go for a walk in the quad because it's Monterey and it's beautiful. Or I'd go to the beach, which I think I only went to the beach like a total of like 2 or 3 times the entire time I was in Monterey. So, but taking a break is what helped me get through that long process to prevent burnout. Tip number 5. Oh, no, we skipped that. So those were the main tips. So we want to talk about motivating yourself. Okay, we talked about how to identify and how to combat writer's block. We want to talk and turn around and hit the flip side of that coin and talk about how to motivate yourself. So the first thing you want to do is you want to make a mood board. Okay? Does anybody know what a mood board is? Is that a hand? Okay. So a mood board is filled with imagery, quotes, character aesthetics, or music that reflects your story and triggers your creativity. So this could be something you do digitally, where you just have pictures of other people or characters that remind you of the character that you're creating. Or maybe it's the scene that you're, what?
I've done that.
Okay, you've done that. Or maybe it's a scene that you're writing and you want to describe the landscape, or you've got this idea for the landscape. And so you put together these lists, you write it out, you post it, whatever it is, and you put that mood board out in front of you so you can write a scene or you can write a character, you can develop it. So making a mood board is really good because it uses other forms of creativity like list making and scrapbooking and music and other things to draw in that inspiration, because we're going to be drawing inspiration from everything that we encounter, whether it's music, images, movies, video games, what have you. Okay? One of the things that helped me develop one of the characters in my 5th book was I was playing through Mortal Kombat. But it was, I take it back, it was either Mortal Kombat or it was Injustice Part 2, which is a Justice League video game that operates very similarly to Mortal Kombat. But I was playing as Sub-Zero, and he's one of my favorite characters from the Mortal Kombat franchise, and he's referred to as a cryomancer. I had forgotten that he was a cryomancer. All I knew is that he had the ability to manipulate ice. Yes?
What's your problem, Mr.?
Cryo meaning cold, mancer meaning manipulator of. Okay, he uses ice magic, basically. And so that helped me develop a character for the book that I was writing at the time, and that character is a cryomancer. Okay, you don't know it for the longest time, but it becomes an issue later on. So without realizing it, I was in my head creating a mood board specifically for this character just by playing a video game, because I was getting these ideas and this imagery into my head. Because I then later went down and I listed all those things. So the next tip for motivating yourself, okay? Turn it into a game. All right? Gamifying your writing goals and rewarding yourself with points and rewards for certain levels of points can help motivate you. All right? So say, for example, my goal is to write, people online can't see this because I'm writing on a whiteboard, but write a 4,500 word chapter. Okay? That is a lot of words to write in one go. Okay? And so what did I say my writing process looks like? Who remembers? So I write it down by hand, chapter by chapter, and then each chapter I go in and I type it up. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start writing. Say my first goal is worth 10 points, and it's fill out one page in notebook. Okay? That's 10 points right there. Okay? Step 2. Let's build on it. So it's 20 points this time around. Fill out 5 pages, back and front. So 5 sheets of paper in the notebook, back and front. Okay, that's technically a total of 10 pages. Okay, the next one would be 50 points. At this point, it's 10 pages, back and front. Okay? At this point, I've scored a total of 80 points. But my goal is to hit 200. At 200, I'll buy myself a coffee. Get coffee. Okay? So in hitting these 3 goals, I've gotten almost halfway there. All right? So gamifying your experience and giving yourself reward points that you can then build up is a great way. In fact, we see this being used on mobile apps for food services all the time. You go on to McDonald's, you go to Starbucks, you earn points for your purchases. Those points can then be turned around for free items, and you get a reward. It's really overpriced because, say you spend $5 at McDonald's, you only get 500 points, but the first thing that you can get is an iced coffee, medium iced coffee for 1,500 points. You have to spend $15 at least just to get the 1,500 points, just to be able to get the free coffee, which the coffee is only like $2. So, gamify it, have fun with it, reward yourself. Tip number 3 for motivating yourself: create playlists for your story. Music playlists that match a scene or a character to listen to when writing to give you the emotional or tonal inspiration you need. One of the types of music that I listen to most frequently is rock music. And so when I'm listening to that, I listen for certain things that key in certain tones, certain qualities. One of my favorite bands is called Breaking Benjamin. They're a kind of a heavy metal rock band-ish. And in 2015, on one of their newest albums, the album was called Dark Before Dawn. And literally, the opening track, it was an instrumental track called Dark. And the tone of it is very bleak. It gives you this tone that everything is chaotic and oppressive. And then the very last track is another instrumental piece called Dawn. And it's a little bit longer. And when you listen to it, it sounds, just by the sound alone, if you were to close your eyes, it sounds like the musical equivalent of a sunrise. And those two pieces stuck with me when I was in the process of developing the plot for one of my books, because that book dealt with vampires. It dealt with things being in the darkness, and it dealt with sunrise. So that's one way to do it. Another example is I worked on a short story that's in my new anthology. The story is called Emily. I wrote it back in 2022. And that entire story was written to the album of Wilder Mind by Mumford & Sons, where there are lyrical references, there are title references, and tonal references throughout the story, referencing all 12 tracks on that album. So music is a really great way to provide the emotional or tonal inspiration for the story. So that's tip number 3. Oh, wow. Tip number 4. Invent fake deadlines. All right? And there's 2 points to this. You need to create deadlines with real consequences, like telling your friend you will buy them a coffee if you miss it. So say, for example, you've gamified your writing process, and you're wanting to get that coffee that you want to reward yourself with, but you've set yourself a date. So if you don't get your 10 pages, say like you start writing on Monday, so Monday would be the 10th. So say you didn't get it written by 10 pages by by Wednesday the 12th. So the deadline is 3/12/25. Okay? If you don't hit that deadline, you buy your friend a coffee, which means you can't buy yourself a coffee. All right? This is a real world consequence. It's a real consequence because you set yourself a deadline and you didn't make that deadline. All right? One of the things that you can do is, if you want to do something within a certain day, set yourself a timer and try to complete a writing project before time runs out. This can be a timer that runs only for 15 minutes. Maybe it's 20 minutes. Maybe it's a couple of hours. Maybe it's 3 days. Whatever you want to do, however you want to set that timer, you can do that. You can do that, and it will help give you a deadline to get things done. Any questions? James. Because he's been in the bathroom for way longer than he needs to be. All right. Tip number 5, writing character letters. Write letters from the POV or point of view of one of your characters, because it might help stimulate some unexpected creative directions. This is a great way to get into character motivations. This is a great way to kind of establish a character arc and what you want to accomplish with a particular character. So when I was in college, I was working through a story that I had been inspired to write. It was a Batman fan fiction piece, and I was developing the villain. And I wrote the villain, I wrote a letter or a diary entry from the villain's perspective. And it helped, and it was like, ran for like 5 or 6 pages. It helped develop that character. It helped develop the motivations and what I wanted to accomplish with that character's arc. And it helped really inform what I was doing when I wrote through the story. I've done other things that are similar when I was doing theater. We would write journal entries for ourselves as characters to help us stay in character when we're working on things that are a little bit more serious in tone, because it helped us understand what our motivations were as performers playing these characters. What you might do is record yourself having a conversation as the character. It might sound weird, it might make you feel like you're a complete psychopath. You're not. What you're doing is you're having this conversation because you're mentally working through all those little blocks and kinks that are preventing you from really getting into the character's mindset. Okay? There's a lot of times where authors will say that their characters kind of take on a life of their own, where they will start to write the story and then the character will do something that completely forces them to go in a different direction with the story. And that's absolutely true, because even if I plan out how I want a chapter or a sequence of action to take place, my characters will do things that will surprise me. And so the more you get into that headspace of the characters, you'll see that happening as well. Tip number 6 for motivating yourself: turn writing into the reward. We talked earlier about gamifying and setting yourself these goals to give yourself a reward. But if you frame writing as the real treat instead of the task, it's all about mindset. Promise yourself a writing session as a reward for doing the dishes. Promise yourself a writing session for vacuuming the house and getting things cleaned up. Promise yourself a writing session because you finished a day at school and you really need this to kind of decompress from whatever it is. And what you might do to help work through whatever writer's block is, maybe that writing session is a free write, where you're journaling or something to get those thoughts out of your head so that they aren't a distraction, so that you can turn around and write on something that you really want to write. Okay? Let's see how we're doing. Got some weird people in the chat here. Interesting. We're having a conversation about pretty names. Hi, welcome back. Did you die? Were you fighting for your life? I'll go back to the slides you missed. Oh no, I will, because you'll need that information. There's going to be a quiz later. How do you know? All right. Tip number 7 for motivating yourself: write scenes out of order. All right. If you are stuck on a particular scene, bounce to another scene and begin writing that. The work might generate some answers for the section where you feel stuck. This actually is a practice that happens in filmmaking. Okay? They do not film movies in order. Very rarely will they do that. When editing technology was at its infancy, yeah, they used to film things in sequential order. But nowadays, with the way that modern editing techniques and modern editing technology has developed, you can film everything out of order and then place it in order in post when you're going through the edit process. Okay? Same thing with writing a story. You write out of order, write out of sequence, and then fix things and move things around as necessary. Because what this is going to do is, if you are trying to get to a particular area and you don't know how to get there, just jump to that area, write that sequence, because that'll give you the answers that you're looking for. All right, next up. Want me to go back? Okay.
Now I'm actually worried that there's going to be a quiz.
No.
There's going to be. The quiz is going to be on how to properly motivate yourself. All right, tip number 8, create a buddy system. Okay, this is all about accountability. Partner with another writer that you know and schedule regular check-ins to hold each other accountable, or to have joint writing sprints or sessions. A lot of people that I follow on Instagram who are writers, they will schedule, like once a week, they'll schedule a 15 to 20 minute, maybe even 30-minute long session on Instagram Live. They will invite certain people to join in on them, and they will do writing sprints, and they will talk about what they're working on and hold each other accountable. And they'll do this in a public forum, and it's a really cool thing. I have not been invited to do something like that. I have not engaged in anything like that, and that's just mainly because I'm kind of a wuss. It's hard for me to engage with other writers and be held accountable to what I'm working on, because most of the time what I'm working on is publication for other things. But this is a great way to hold each other accountable. I did try this a few years ago. I was working on a writing project with a buddy of mine, and we had spitballed this idea for an anthology of cyberpunk style sci-fi adventures that were they all took place in the same world. There's going to be a little bit of crossover, but for the most part, each story was going to be its own little vignette. And what ended up happening is I started writing something. I gave him his first assignment to write something, and then he didn't follow through. And the longer it took for him to get anything done, I'm like, okay, we just have to put a kibosh on this, because nothing's gonna get done. All right. But having someone to hold you accountable or to join you on writing sprints is a really great way to have a buddy system, to establish it, and to get things done in a productive way. And it doesn't have to be on a daily basis. It can be on a weekly basis or a bi-monthly basis, just whatever is comfortable for you and the person or people that you're working with.
What about a yearly basis?
No, that's not frequent enough. Because if you're only checking in with someone on a yearly basis, then they're not able to actually help you when you get stuck. And you're not able to help them when they get stuck. And there's no accountability, because then you're just being lazy for a year. James. Tip number 9 for motivating yourself. Play what-if games. If your story feels stale, ask yourself what-if questions to spark new ideas and reignite curiosity about your story to make it feel like an adventure again. Okay? This can be something as simple as, what if Thanos didn't snap his fingers? What would happen? What if Batman's parents never died? What if the Green Lantern ring did not go to Hal Jordan, but went to someone else instead? What if dragons are real? What if the dragons didn't go extinct? What if the vampires didn't get created? These are questions that I ask in my series, these last 3. Because in my series, dragons are an endangered species. They're on the verge of extinction. But so too are vampires. Because vampires are an entirely predatory, parasitic race of beings. And what happens when you have an entirely parasitic organism or civilization and they have no food source anymore? Bingo. And that's how most parasites or viruses die, is that they don't have anything to feed off of anymore because they've killed everything, they've consumed everything. So asking yourself these what-if questions can spark new ideas for discussion between characters. It can spark new ideas for scenes. So my first question when I was working on my third book was, who created the vampires in my series? And so that became very simple for me. I answered the question with creating a character. His name is Drak Asar. Well, what does his name mean? His name literally means dragon of death. Okay? And I had worked it in originally in my series that the dragons, elves, vampires, and humans are all very interconnected. But this was the bridging character because Drak Asar had been a dragon. He had been the first dragon. He created the dragons first. And then he decided to become human. And then he decided to take up the mantle of being a dragon once more, but he did it with dark powers, and when he came upon a group of elves, he turned into the first vampire, and the elves that he attacked and tried to kill became his first vampire children. And those vampires continued to make more vampires. So they're all bridged, they're all interconnected. And that's a fun little thing to do off of one what-if question. All right? So, James, between the time that I started this section and the time that you left to go to the bathroom and came back, what tips are you missing? Because I know you're here for the mood board.
3, 4, 5, and 6.
Okay, 3, create playlists for your story. This is about music. 4, invent fake deadlines with real consequences. If you miss a deadline, there has to be a consequence. 5, write character letters. Write things from, like, maybe it's a letter, maybe it's a diary entry or a journal entry. Maybe pretend to have a conversation with a character that you can record as if you are a character. Do it from their perspective, their point of view. Number 6, turn writing into a reward. Because tip 2 was talking about gamifying it and give yourself rewards for accomplishing writing tasks. Turn writing into a reward, that if you do something really good, like you vacuum the house, or you do the dishes, or you fold your laundry and put it away in a timely fashion, that you can then take a break and do some writing. Okay? 7,
Already did 7.
I know, write scenes out of order. 8, create a buddy system. 9, play what-if games. Here's our writing prompt. Ignore the words Western genre. That was a typo. Here's your writing prompt. A stranger walks into a general store and buys a hammer, a hatchet, some rope, and an apple. Finish the story. Okay? I'll give you 30 minutes. And for those of you online, thank you for joining us. Here's our prompt. A stranger walks into a general store and buys a hammer, a hatchet, some rope, and an apple. You don't have to write it in a Western genre. That was a typo from last week, or from last month. Have fun with it, and if you want to submit something, you can do so on, you can submit it to me on Instagram. or on YouTube, or you can email it to me. All those contacts will be in the video description. Thank you.